Well, hey, we're so glad you guys are here. Welcome back to campus. I know it's been a minute. It's been a while since you guys have all been here in one place. 6th through 12th grade, we've been separate all summer. We watched a video series. We started a new series in the book of John. And that's where we're going to continue on tonight. We're going to be continuing on in our series called I Am. If you're a 6th grade student, you've missed the last 3 weeks, but that's okay because you're picking up here in the last 3 weeks. You're going to hear some more of what Jesus had to say about himself and who he is. And then if you're new in the room tonight, if you haven't been for the last 3 weeks, I'm so sorry that you missed those first 4 I Ams, but I'm going to run back over them very quick. Jesus starts off in John chapter 6. He says, I am the bread of life. And you're going to hear me use this term tonight and probably for the rest of the series. I've used it every time, is we use this word Zoe. Z-O-E is how it's translated into English, but it's a Greek word for life. And Jesus says, I am the bread of Zoe. Zoe meaning that there's this life that's more. Living and not making a living is not good enough. There's this life that I come to give you. If you eat off of me, you get this certain life. And this certain life is the kind of life that steps out of heaven and puts on flesh, then dies on a cross, goes to a grave, raises up again, so that I could go and be with my Father and so that you could have a relationship with Him. That's what Jesus does. That is the essence of the gospel. That God steps out of heaven, He lives a perfect life, then puts on the sins of humanity, dies on the cross for us to give us a different kind of life. Jesus uses the word Zoe. That's the kind of life He wants to give. Then we fast forward a couple of months later in the timeline. Jesus is at the Feast of Booths, and he's saying this in the midst of all of these lamps, in the midst of this party going on in this city. He says, I am the light of the world. And we liken that to being at the LSU football game and smelling the grilled food in the air and seeing the lights and the stars run out onto the field and all of these things. And Jesus, in essence, is doing the same thing, standing on the 50-yard line. He says, it's all about me. He makes this claim of godhood. He says, I am the light of the world. And I don't judge you the way that you deserve to be judged. We learn that our judgment that we deserve is death, and not a good one. We were made sinners by our own fault, and we deserve to die. But Jesus says, I don't judge you by the way that you deserve to be judged. I judge you in a different kind of way. Go and sin no more. And then last week, Pastor Clayton and Pastor Todd, they did such a great job representing Jesus being the door to the sheep and the good shepherd. Jesus being the door to the sheep is this essence of letting the flock come in and protecting the flock. And then the good shepherd, same thing. He leads the flock. He guides the flock. The sheep know His voice. How do they know His voice? By spending time with Him, because He is a personal God that wants to spend time with you. 4 I am statements in 3 weeks. It's a lot to take in. Here's the 5th. I am the resurrection and the life. Good Zoe life. You need more than just to go to work and grind and grind and grind. You need some more life, and I'll raise you to it, is where he starts here in this passage. In John chapter 11, if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and flip there. I would encourage you not to use the one on your phone. It'll be on the screen if that's the case. But John chapter 11, verses 1 through 16. These won't be up on the screen. I'll just paraphrase this for you. We see this guy and his 2 sisters, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. If you were here watching over the summer the Chosen series, you see Mary a little bit. You don't get to see Martha. You don't get to see Lazarus. I'm hoping season 2, you maybe catch a glimpse of them. But we see this family, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Mary and Martha sinned for Jesus' help. Here in the first few verses of John chapter 11. They say, Lazarus has fallen ill. Jesus, come. And Jesus makes this statement. He says, this is not an illness that will lead to death. Whew, right? This is not an illness that leads to death, but it will bring me glory. And you're like 3 verses in and you're like, what? How does this guy's sickness lead to God being glorified? And that, what we tried to tackle a couple of weeks ago on Sunday with the book of Ruth, is that God's in control. God's in control. God is sovereign. That's what that big word means, sovereign. He is in control. He is over it all. And sometimes that's hard for us. We talked about it on Sunday morning a couple of weeks ago. I preached on the book of Ruth. Sometimes what that means for God to be in control and we can't understand, that means sometimes it's hard for us to accept. Sometimes it's hard for us to want to believe that God is in control. Look at COVID-19. Man, God is in control of all this, and you're like, where's He at? Come on, where is He at? Show up, God. And the story keeps going. He says, but it brings glory to me. And He looks at His disciples that are with Him and He says, it's all good. And they stay a couple of extra days where they're at. Then Jesus, He looks at His disciples 2 days later. He's like, all right, let's go. And they're like, I can just imagine being a disciple in this moment and just being like, didn't you just say like everything's good? He's like, we've got to go because our brother Lazarus has fallen asleep. Well, the last they heard, Lazarus is sick. When you're sick, what do you want to do? Anybody else in the house? They want to just lay in bed, sleep, turn off the lights, watch a little Netflix, not go to school, am I right? So the disciples thinking on this playing field, they're like, well, yeah, he's sick. 2 days ago, we heard that. He should be in bed. He should be asleep. Jesus, I love it, right? And I love the disciples' interaction. He's like, all right, let me tell you a little more plainly than this. He's dead. And they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Why didn't you just start with that, right? Like, that's how this interaction I could see happening with me. Be like, Jesus, why are we going? He's asleep. Cool. No, he's really dead. I'm like, why didn't you just say that the first time? That's me as a disciple. That's probably why I didn't live in the first century, because you get some real weird stories in the Bible. So I would question a lot, but here we go. So they start to go back into the city where Jesus was actually about to be stoned, and they remind Him of that. And Jesus reminds them that He is the light. That those who walk in the light in the daytime will not stumble, but those who walk in darkness will. Jesus obviously being the light of the world and His disciples walking in light. They won't stumble. It's all of this kind of tying back into the chapters previous. And we pick up in verse 17. And I want you to write this down if you have notes. You should have notes in your seat and a pen. If not, you can raise your hand and we can make sure you get some. But if you write this down, it's expectations. That first blank, expectations. Can you throw that slide up there for me? All right. For anybody who doesn't know how to spell expectations, there it is. If you were to ask me to spell it right now, I couldn't. I'd have to turn around and read it because I'm a bad speller out loud. So, or I'd have to write it down. So, expectations. Here, what we're about to see here in verse 17 and here in the verses following are some things about expectations. Anybody know what an expectation is? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Well, this is about to go really smoothly if you guys don't know what expectations are. Expectations is something, I'm trying not to use the word expect, something you think will go ahead and happen, essentially. Something that you predetermined to think it's going to come into a certain outcome, right? You expect here at church that somebody's going to get up and preach or somebody's going to get up and lead worship. So here the disciples start to expect things. There's some people in the story that start to expect things. And we see what Jesus does in light of those expectations. In verse 17, now when Jesus came, He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met Him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to Him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And here's our I am statement. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Verse 27. She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. And we could stop right there and you'd be like, yeah, that's pretty straightforward, right? Guy's dead. He comes. God, if you wouldn't have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Anybody else kind of feel that way? Jesus, if you would have just came 2 days ago, we wouldn't even have to be having this conversation. 4 days later, Lazarus in the grave. I don't know how long it takes Jesus to get here, but at least that 2 days that he waits and the travel time, and he's already been dead for 4 days. It's kind of straightforward here, right? There's some expectations on our part as 21st century Americans that we could blow right past this and move on. And there was expectations on Martha's part. She said, Lord, if you would have just been here. There's expectations in Mary's part that she's mourning her brother who's dead. She's weeping. There's this expectation of all of these people who have come to console them. I don't know if you've ever lost a loved one, but it's kind of like that, right? When you lose that loved one, all these family members from all over the place and all of these friends from all over the place come to your house and they console you. Or if you're in the place where they have the visitation, they come and they shake your hand and they hug you and they weep with you and they give you a hug and they shake your hand and they just give you encouraging words. It's all of this scene. There's a lot of things that are expected on our end and their end that we see. But Jesus comes in and he flips all of these expectations upside down. And for us, actually, we miss some of the things that Jesus is actually trying to do and what the text is actually trying to say to us because we're 21st century Americans. We're not Jews back then. In first century Palestine, we're actually removed. And so it all starts back when it says, when Jesus arrives, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. Did you know that in that culture, they thought that the spirit of the body would have lingered for 3 days? And on the 4th day, they would be gone. No hope of resurrection. Lazarus essentially is dead. And the text wants us to know, don't just assume, but the text wants us to know that he's really dead. Day 4, his spirit's gone. There's no hope for Lazarus anymore. Did you know that Mary and Martha would have fasted multiple days? They would have been weak and hungry. They would have done that for at least 3 days while the body's in the house. All of these people who have come to console them, it was their duty to come and do so. And they would have been there for about 30 more days to mourn. They would weep for 3, cry for 3 days, and then they would mourn for 30. All of these things that we, as 21st century Americans, when we read the text, we just blow right by. We miss completely. There's a lot more going on here. What we expect is completely different than the reality that they're living in. And Jesus still then comes and turns it all upside down. He changes the expectation. Not only that, we see the conversations with Martha that's going on here. And we think, oh man, she's a faithful follower of Jesus. I was watching a sermon on this and the pastor said it this way. Martha just gives religious platitudes. Platitudes is another word for that is jargon, or how about maybe cliche, or something that we just say that we don't really mean. Anybody ever been in that spot? When you're talking to God and you're like, man, God, I know you can do it, but really on the inside, you just really kind of are struggling to believe that. We've got 3 religious platitudes. Good word right there. Guys, middle school, go to your schools now. Share that with the ladies. They're going to think you're smart. We see that she says, whatever you ask of God, I know you'll do it. I know he'll do it for you. Every time Jesus refers to this asking of the Father of himself, the way he references himself with God, he puts them on the same level. Why? Because he is the Son of God. He is 100% God, 100% man, living here on earth. The way that Martha says it in the Greek is that he's inferior to the Father. We miss that. She's saying, Jesus, I know you as subservient to God the Father if you ask him. But every other time in John, Jesus, when he refers to him and the Father, they have this level playing ground, this level equality. Why? Because he's still 100% God who walked out of heaven to come and save us. That's key. The second thing she says, I know he'll rise again in the last days. He's like, do you believe that he'll be raised? Do you think he can rise up? Well, yeah. Like at the end of time, when you go back into heaven and you bring your armies and all of these things and all of us will rise up again. Yeah, absolutely. When we all die in the last days, we'll all rise up again. She just said, God, Jesus, I believe you can do whatever. But then she says, no, but on the last day. She puts Jesus in this box. The third thing we see, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. Everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who's coming into the world. You're going to fast forward here in a few minutes, and you're going to see she really doesn't mean this statement. These are all religious platitudes. These are things that she says that she doesn't necessarily believe in her heart. Write this down. You may expect one thing. You may expect one thing, but Jesus can do things you don't expect. You may expect one thing, but Jesus can do things you don't expect. And you can add this next to can do, and will do things you don't expect. Not only can he, because he is God and he's in control, but he will do things. Why? The scripture tells us he can do more than we could think or ever conjure up in our minds. It says that when we are in this comparison between us and God, his thoughts are higher than mine. His ways are higher than mine. He can do and he will do things you don't expect. He will come in and break that mold that you've put him in and work outside of the box that you've tried to confine him to walk alongside you, to lead you somewhere, and to show you his godness and his holiness. And we're going to see that here in the rest of this passage. But before we move on to that, I want to go back to this word life. We talked about Zoe life. He says, I am the resurrection and the Zoe. I'm going to give you this kind of life that you don't even understand yet. It's a spiritual life that's vigorous and active, right? But then he says, he uses this in this next phrase, believe, and though you die, you will live. He switches back to the word zao, which is the other form of life here in the text. He says, not only do you get that kind of life, you're actually going to live. You're going to have a physical life. Let me read you this story about this former believer who's now passed. Hopefully I don't butcher his name. Takashi Ishii. Ishii was an unparalleled criminal. He had murdered men, women, and children in the most brutal way. Anyone who stood in his way was eliminated. And now he was in prison awaiting death. While in prison, he was visited by two Canadian women who tried to talk to him through the bars, but he only growled at them like a caged and savage animal. And in the end, they abandoned the attempt and they gave him a Bible, hoping that it might succeed where they had failed. He began to read it, and having started, could not stop. He read on until he came to the story of the crucifixion. He came to the words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And these words broke him. Takashi says, I stopped. I was stabbed in the heart as if I was pierced with 5-inch nail. Shall I call it the love of Christ? Shall I call it his compassion? I do not know what to call it. I only know that I believed, and my hardness of heart was changed. Later, when the condemned man, still awaiting in prison, went to the gallows, he was no longer hardened, a surly brute he had once been, but smiling and a radiant man. The murderer had been born again. Christ had brought Takashi Ishii to life. In this moment, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. It says he pierced his heart, and his whole spiritual demeanor changed. He says, do I call it the love of Christ or his compassion? I don't really know, but in that moment, I was changed. I dare to say some of you have had that feeling, that pierced to your heart, that felt like a 5-inch nail to the depths of your bones, and God has changed your spiritual life and your spiritual destination forever. This man who had once been a murderer of men, women, and children will now get to be forever with the Father. Why? Because he didn't get the judgment that he deserved, but the judgment that Christ came and took for him on the cross. And not only did he change his spiritual life, he changed his physical life in the moment where he was once a surly brute growling at women as if a caged animal, now is smiling and radiant on the way to his death. Why? because he's got an eternal destination with the Father. His physical life changed. His spiritual destination, life, Zoe and Zao, changed. Jesus, I don't know my Siri, just thought I just was talking to her there for a second. Jesus can come and change everything that you expect. What you expect you deserve, what you expect about anything in your life, he can come and change it and will change it. And he will give you life and every kind of life that you need. The second point I want to bring us to kind of start to drive us home is emotions. Write that down. Emotions. This is an emotionally charged passage. In verse 28, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here, and he is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went. And now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Sound familiar? When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and greatly troubled, and he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, Could not he open the eyes of the blind man, also have kept this man from dying? We don't have to break into the Greek here. We don't have to deep dig into the heritage of the Jews. Why? Because this is actually a pretty straightforward part of the passage. It is emotionally charged, and people are broken, and lives are wrecked. We see it in Mary. Lord, if you would have just been here. The crowd, thinking Mary is about to go and weep at the tomb, follows her to go and weep with her. Why? Because they just lost a friend. Jesus coming face to face with the people that he loved and that he walked with, even though he knew what he was about to do, takes a moment. And these families' weakness in this hardest time, says he weeps. This speaks volumes about Jesus and who he is and his nature, that he would come right alongside of us in our emotions and our brokenness and weep. Write this down. Jesus comes right along with us in our emotions. And some of you need a reminder of that today. I need a reminder of that today. Jesus comes right alongside of us in our emotions, whether they are sad emotions, mad emotions, accusatory emotions, emotions that put him down or doubt him, frustrated emotions, anxious emotions, depressed emotions. How do we know? Check the case study. Martha, Mary, the crowd. He comes right alongside and he weeps with them, and he knows he's about to do one of the greatest miracles man has ever seen. He's about to show them who God is, yet he takes a moment to share in their brokenness and weep with these people. Where does Jesus rebuke them? He doesn't. Where does Jesus give them a teaching on how they should have more trust and how they shouldn't weep and how they shouldn't this and how they shouldn't that and how they shouldn't be mad? Now, sometimes I will say this, God will come and he will give us that. He'll say, hey, look, kind of get it together. Let's talk it through. God will speak to you through his word, through other people, and there will be moments of teaching, but there are moments where Jesus comes right alongside of us in those emotions and bears them with us. Waiting for Jesus, looking for him. Mary and Martha, they're waiting for the servant to come back. They've gone through this roller coaster. They've seen their brother fall suddenly ill and then most likely violently die. And they wait and they wait and they wait. Imagine all the emotions that are accompanied alongside with that. How many of you been there? Anybody? Anybody ever have some emotions, some roller coaster rides of emotions? Thank you for my leader in the back. Come on, bro. I appreciate that honesty right there. Hey, look, wherever you at, thank you for your honesty, because here's the deal. We all go through it. And there are moments in time where we question whether he will show up. And we wait and we wait and we wait. Maybe some of you are still waiting. Right now, I'm still waiting. I've been on a very emotional roller coaster over the last 6 months. Sitting in my home for about 2 months by myself. My wife goes to work every day and then comes back home. I worked from home for a while, preparing sermons and preaching to you guys online. And even some of you who tuned in online heard me share part of this story. But I went through something that was, I feel, very close to depression. I don't know if you could call it that. I don't know clinically, whatever. But I felt very lonely, very sad, very drained. I had very little human interaction. The only other living being in my home was my dog. I don't really like dogs. He was just there. That was March, and that was April. May, June, July, and here into the beginning of August. Very frustrated, very angry, very bitter about X, Y, and Z. We don't have to get into the particulars, it's just that the emotions were there. And maybe some of you over the last 6 months have been there and have felt that and have gone there, and maybe you're still waiting. Man, I've been praying, God, take the frustration, take the anger. I'm still waiting, but I know it's coming. Because here's the deal. I was reminded of this as I was praying with somebody today. I was getting my hair cut, and my barber, she had just lost a family member. And I know I'm about to preach this passage about emotions, and I'm dealing with my emotions. And I take a moment, stop, and pray with her. And I look up, and she's crying. And what I just said was exactly what I told you, that He is the God that will come and sit with us in our emotions. And I prayed that exact thing over her in that moment. And in faith, believing that God would show up for her. And I have faith in believing that God will show up. And at some point, He will sit with me and we'll have that knee-to-knee conversation. And we'll cry together. And we'll weep together. Because my God is not a distant God. He cares for me and for my soul. This last thing I want you to write down is effect. E-F-F. Not A, but with an E. Effect. Jesus, we see, is this effect. John 11, 38 through 44 to wrap up. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and the stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to Him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days." If you go look in the King James Version, it says not odor, but it'll stinketh. That is a real thing. It is in the Bible. Look it up. King James, stinketh. I did not believe when I heard, and I looked it up, and it is actually there. "Lord, it will stinketh, because he has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up His eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I knew that you always hear me. But I said this on the account of people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When He said these things, He cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Jesus, you can write this down, is the great effect that raises us to life. Jesus is the great effect that raises us to life. This